So the other day I was watching a little bit of YouTube and I came across some Fuji XS10 reviews. And when I was watching them, I was kind of like, first of all, am I the only person in the world who, after they buy something, goes back and watches a review after the fact just to see if you were right or wrong in your assessment? Maybe I'm just crazy, I don't know. But now when I went back and watched them, the overall reaction from the Fujiistas out there was basically meh. I was like, meh? This is a great camera if you ask me. So when I was watching them, there was a few main complaints that kind of were consistent amongst all the videos. I want to talk about some of those common complaints and tell you why, if you're a Sony or Canon fanboy and like I was myself, why the XS10 should be on your list. The XS10 was made for us, not the Fujiistas out there. The main source of contention among the Fujiistas was the lack of dials and buttons. Generally on Fuji cameras, you have a bunch of custom buttons and dials, and even the dials can become buttons. And you usually can switch the function of each of the buttons or the dials, or even the function of the dials that become buttons. It all really just becomes so confusing in the end, especially if you don't use your camera every day. You see, Fujiistas, they love their buttons and dials, and they were just not happy at all with Fuji after they removed some of them from the XS10. They also didn't like the fact that there was no 4K 60. You see, the XS10 was one of the first cameras on the market that featured 10-bit 4K 60. And even though the XS10 shares the same processor and sensor, they didn't include it in the XS10. The main reason, if you ask me, is the camera is too small to handle the codec. And although you can still get 10-bit if you use an external recorder, I mean, does anybody ever do this? I just can't grasp why you would buy a whole nother device to record footage that you can record with your camera. It just doesn't make any sense to me. Maybe I'm just not that cool yet, I don't know. But you can use an external recorder to record 10-bit in your XS10. So if you're into that type of thing, you can do it with the external recorder. But anyhow, the body, if you ask me, is just too small. And if they would have included it, it would have had major overheating issues, or they would have had major time limits on the 4K 60. And I can respect not releasing something your camera could do, but not very well, to the point where people would just have been flaming you online. So you just left it out. Even though you don't get 4K 60, you still get 4K up to 30 frames per second and 1080p up to 240 frames per second, which matches or exceeds what other cameras in this class can do. And in my opinion, the video just looked fantastic, especially when shooting in a turn of profile simulation. Lastly, most like to complain about the battery life. Don't let the Fuji people fool you. They've been dealing with this crappy little battery forever now, but when you compare it to the batteries found in much larger cameras like the X-T4, the A7S III, or some of the larger cameras, yeah, it's pretty crappy. But when you compare it to similar size cameras with similar size batteries, I think it holds up fairly well with the competition. So you can find really cheap third-party batteries on Amazon. So just make sure you take a few extra with you, and that pretty much solves the problem. I wish the battery life was better though, I'm not gonna lie to you. Now let me talk to all you Fuji guys out there. This camera was not made for you. This camera is a gateway camera into Fuji ecosystem for guys like me who've been shooting with Sony and Canon, APS-C, and been greatly disappointed, or for people brand new into cameras and want a relatively inexpensive, easy camera to use, and it really performs above its weight. Now let me talk to the Sony and Canon users out there. This is what an APS-C camera should do. It seems to me that Sony and Canon just can't seem to get there. I just have to think that they're trying to protect their full frame line, or just can't commit even partially to the APS-C line. Either way, the APS-C offerings just plain fall short. With Fuji, you either have APS-C or medium format, and I don't think there's much of a crossover market. So they have to be committed to developing the best APS-C lineup they can. Now let's take a look at the lens lineup for each manufacturer. On Canon, you have the M mount, which is basically dead. You have a couple of zoom lenses, and luckily for them, Sigma prime lenses. Other than that, nothing. And nothing seems to be on the horizon either. If you are looking into an M mount camera, you should really take into consideration the lens selection. If you think you may go further than the kit lens, you may be in trouble with the M mount. Sony isn't much better though, but luckily for them, Sigma and Tamron, they kind of bailed them out on the APS-C lens. They have a decent selection, and it seems to be slowly improving. but still, it doesn't seem they are committed to the line above what they already have released as far as lenses go. Fuji, on the other hand, has a wide range of lenses, and better than that, they have a wide range of pricing. You can get the top of the line Fuji lenses that could cost you a pretty penny, or you can step down to a less expensive lens that will get the job done. Some of the Fuji lenses were developed for photography, so they're a little bit behind on the lenses for video. Some of the lenses are a little slow to autofocus and they may be a little bit loud, but they seem to be updating their lenses lineup at a pretty good pace. I mean, look at this lens. This is why you get into the APS-C. Small, tiny, light lenses that don't cost an arm and a leg. They're also recently started to let third parties develop lenses for the system. Now you have players like Viltrox and Samyangs and Seven Artisans, and they make some fine lenses for less money. And hopefully, fingers crossed, Tamron and Sigma will be getting into the game really soon. I'm telling you, that Sigma 16 1.4mm lens on this Fuji X-S10 would just look great. Man, I hope they get it released. Let's take a look at the video specs for a minute. The Canon M50 is basically a 1080 camera. The 4K crop is so ridiculous that you really can't even use it in 4K. The Sony, you get basically the same video specs, 4K up to 30. But with Fuji, you also get slow-mo at 240, which is capped out at 120 frames per second on the Sony. But with Sony, you also get the rolling shutter that's just legendary bad. And while the Fuji isn't the best in the world, it's not as bad as the Sony. The most important thing with video is the stabilization, though, if you ask me. When you have a camera like this, more than likely, you're going to want to be using it while you're out and about, you know, vlogging or taking family video or just, you know, whatever. The IBIS coupled with the electronic image stabilization of the X-S10, they kind of take it to the next level. You even have a boost mode, like if you want to film a stationary item, and you can just lock it on right there and it'll look like it's sitting on a tripod. It is really that good. Just don't use the lenses with stabilization built into the lens, and especially if you can't turn the stabilization of the lens off. Like the 16 to 80, the lens stabilization and the IBIS, they just don't play well together. But if you get a lens like this 16 2.8, it does a pretty good job of stabilizing the footage. Now I'm not going to sit here and tell you that the X-S10 doesn't have room for improvement. At least for video. Photos, it's almost as good as it gets. But I think Fuji, as well as some other manufacturers, they may have been caught flat-footed with the demand and popularity of video. As I've noted in my many other videos, the autofocus is just not as good as Canon or Sony. And it'll definitely lose you from time to time. And especially if you're at a good distance. And especially if you're wearing any kind of glasses, it'll lose you. The auto exposure is just way too sensitive, meaning it'll go up and down and up and down. And that's really distracting. So you really have to do manual mode if you're going to be shooting videos kind of like this. It has a 30-minute record limit, which a lot of people, they just don't like that. But it's never really bothered me too much. You can't say the video settings and the custom buttons, which is completely ridiculous if you ask me. But if there is one thing about this camera that I would change, it would be a lock button on the exposure compensation dial. I'm almost to the point where I'm ready to super glue that sucker down. Man, it bothers me that much. There needs to be a lock on that exposure compensation dial. But overall, I'm telling you that if you're in the market for a mid-tier, less expensive APS-C camera, you owe it to yourself to look into the X-S10. It's really, really a good one. It may not be the camera the pros wanted, but it just might be the camera for you. If you've enjoyed the video, please leave a like. If you want to see more content like this, make sure you subscribe. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you on the next one. Oh boy. Battery went dead.